Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. And today's voice is Paul Standell, who is a favorite in our household. Now, of course, thank you for your time today, Paul.
My pleasure. And it's a depressing stat for your household if it's turned into me being one of the favorites.
Well, I mean, of course, we've spoken a bit before the pod, but Matt really rates you for, you say it how it is on the podcast. I do try and get guests that are no bullshit. And I feel, as I'm sure you do, it's very important for the community, anyone in the fitness space, anyone in life really, to actually be able to rely on us to give education and empowerment without this sort of, what's on in the background of buy my fat loss program and all of these things that happen.
So this isn't the time for me to try and sell you my fat loss program. Okay, my bad. I've judged this wrong. Yeah, no, look, there's a lot of nonsense in the fitness industry, and I think you're always trying to find that right balance of correct information, but delivered in a way that's still engaging enough that people will pay attention to it. I think some part of the industry gets frustrated because they see this nonsense, the snake oil chamois grab, and are frustrated that it works in that people buy it. Doesn't work technically. It works in the sense of it works for sales, right? And there is actually something we can probably take from the nonsense sometimes, which is how it's packaged, how it's marketed, how it's done in a way that appeals to people. Because if we just reject all of that stuff, we're not learning the lesson we should as people who are more interested in also being helpful with our content. Is yeah, but you can only be helpful if people pay attention to it. And so you've got to find this balance. I know lots of people who are very smart who no one ever listens to because they're very concerned with being right about things rather than being helpful. And I think it's just trying to find that right balance.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And social media, I'm sure we speak a bit about that today. It does have a huge impact on, it's 2024. It's an impact on everyone's lives. And for you as well, we're going to talk about rebuilding your life from rock bottom, essentially. Was there a sort of point where, because Matt's obviously followed you on Instagram for a while, where you started to share more about the things you have struggled with? Because like you say, it's like everyone's looking for this clickbait, etc. It'd be interesting to sort of hear your side of that, to be a bit more open about how you feel.
Yeah, so my background is OCD in that regard, and I suppose on one level I was fortunate that when I was first diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and in particular a subset that's called relationship OCD, which makes me a wonderful catch. It was 2013, late 2013, so over 10 years ago, and I don't think Instagram started till 2014 or 15. It's something around that kind of era. So Facebook existed,
Yeah.
but that's about it. And it was a pretty different place than it is now. And so since social media has been the bigger platform that it now is, let's call that, I don't know, 2017 onwards, maybe something like that. It's not something I found difficult to be open and honest with, but I think some of that comes from experience and time. And if it was the first period of my life when I was struggling with OCD. I first off didn't know that I had OCD. I was just depressed and couldn't seem to stop crying and would, in the middle of client sessions, go and pretend I needed my 18th piss of the day just so I could go cry in the disabled toilet by the bin with the tap on.
Mm.
Right. And then you try and put the face back on and you head out and it's exhausting and draining. And so I thought, then I would have days where I was absolutely fine and then days where I was really down. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And so you start the process of going and seeing your GP, and the GP, it's the start of a triage process. So it's not the GP's fault, but you don't get anything from the GP outside of some antidepressants. So it was citalopram and then sertraline and then fluoxetine. Fluoxetine was the best one for me in the end. Actually, the first time I took citalopram, about a week into taking it, I got like almost the beta alanine itches, right? Kind of thing. Like my body felt itchy and like it was twitching. Like I had to go and just lay. I was like, it was like my body felt anxious, which was kind of weird. And then, so I didn't get on too well with that one. Took it still for a while longer. I didn't have that experience again, but it didn't make as big a difference as I'd have liked. Like the antidepressants for me were a thing that maybe reduced the number of upsetting anxiety evoking thoughts I would have per day from 300 to 250. but they wouldn't give me any skills or anything useful in in those 200 odd that were still existing. So it helped a bit, but in and of itself didn't make a massive difference to my life. But you, from that experience of going to the doctor, you're put on a bit of a triage process of finding out what kind of depression you got, what kind of anxiety you got, because often those things are the symptoms of the underlying issue rather than the issue itself. And so then it's 6 weeks later, you get your first call on the NHS with someone. And it was a lovely lady who I cannot remember the name of because you had 3 calls with her. I wish I could remember her name because she was an important part of my life. And it's just triage, right? So they're asking a bunch of questions. They're trying to narrow down of all the possible shit things you could have, what shit thing do you have? And after several calls, she's like, okay, I think you have obsessive compulsive disorder. And I remember being like, what? Because in my head, that was like turning Coke cans around to face the right way and flicking light switches and cleaning surfaces. And I didn't have any of that. So that didn't occur to me. But really, when you then find out, if you're not familiar, OCD is really a description of an obsession is anything that you can't stop thinking about. In an anxiety sense, it's anything you can't stop thinking about that causes you stress or anxiety, right? Otherwise, if it's just an obsession that causes you joy, well, you're probably not going to go and get treatment for it too much. I wouldn't have thought, right? So it's mainly the negative obsession, something you cannot stop thinking about. And a compulsion is anything that you do that temporarily feels like it soothes the anxiety, right? So something I can't stop thinking about, but when I do this, I feel a little bit better. And that applies to a lot of stuff. So there's different categories of OCD, and it probably makes most sense if I try and describe it with comparison to contamination. OCD is a really easy one to understand, or checking. So contamination is the one where people have to clean a lot, right? And so they're forever wiping the sides. And, what's the obsession? Well, the obsession is a fear that there are germs and contaminants kicking around the joint. And that it's not just that, it's that if those things exist on that space and I accidentally come into contact with them, or my loved ones come into contact with them, then I'm going to get ill, maybe die, etc. So the fear is not of the germ, it's what happens with the germ. That's the deep fear, right? So the compulsion is then, well, I have to clean, I have to make sure the surface is clean because otherwise my loved ones and me will die, right? And so off they go cleaning. And happy days, because we've all thought a bit of that. We've all been like, that looks fucking minging and dirty and filthy. Right, I should probably clean it, right? And so, to some degree, that's a normal thought. But one of the crippling parts of OCD is that there's always an element of doubt that's left of like, is it really clean? Did I miss a bit? Is there a spot over there? So I've got to go back and clean it some more. I've got to check a bit further. I always learned this when I'm going through OCD treatment as the who wants to be a millionaire effect, because it doesn't matter how confident you are in an outcome. On Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when Chris Tarrant back in the day used to say, is that your final answer? You'd be like, what's the capital of France? It's like, did they change it? It's Paris, right? It's Paris. Did I miss something? Like there's a part of you inevitably that goes, well, maybe, right? And then the pursuit of feeling certain that worry you have, the obsession you have, I need to soothe it, right? Because it causes me so much distress. And so when you do the thing, first off, I feel a bit better. I did clean it. Okay, I got rid of the diseases. And then after a little bit, that voice goes, are you sure you got it all? And then so then you're like, oh, maybe not. So then the anxiety is coming back. So then you have to go and clean it again. And then, okay, I feel a bit better now I've cleaned it. But then the voice comes back again. So you have to go and clean it again. And sort of maybe the first time you clean it, the length of time you feel relief for is a few hours. But then you have the doubt. And so then the next time you clean it, maybe the relief is now only an hour and 45 minutes. And then it's an hour and 30 minutes. And then it's an hour and 15, an hour and blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, you're doing nothing but engaging in that obsession and that compulsion to try and soothe yourself and make yourself feel better. And so it's this annoying thing where the thing you're engaging in that you think makes you feel better is actually ruining your life. And actually, that has a lot in common with eating disorder stuff, which
I'm thinking this when you're
exactly right. So if you look at the psychopathology of these things, how these things grow and manifest, they overlap wildly. OCD and eating disorders, they're very, very similar in how they manifest themselves. And so for me, relationship based was feeling like I was unlovable, and that my partner was, of course, going to cheat on me and wouldn't want to be with me, and why would they, and all of the rest of that stuff. And that was so when it first came to my attention, I was dating a person who lived half the year in Dubai and then half the year in the UK. So I wouldn't see them for long chunks of time, and that made things worse. If I look back on my life, I had it before then. I was in a relationship for 5 years from the age of 20 to 25 with someone who had a little girl.
Mhm.
And one of the things with hindsight that was positive for me about that in my head was really she didn't go out very much, right? Because of having a little girl. She'd probably only go out twice a year, right? So I wasn't as worried. I didn't feel as threatened by that. But when she would go out, I'd be all panicky and fucking couldn't sleep and would be stressed and crying and trying to message a million times and all of those bits because I was deeply afraid of being cheated on because I'd been cheated on when I was younger.
Okay.
And so, but even that doesn't fully explain because lots of people have cheated on and don't end up with relationship OCD. So fuck knows why at the end of the day, right? As to, yeah, exactly, right. Um, and so I probably had it for a long time, but when something only happens once or twice a year, it's not frequent enough to feel like it's a problem. You don't notice that how you're dealing with it isn't normal. It just feels kind of normal to you. And so then when I was dating someone who was away a lot, there was this exposure to it a lot. And this was the heart of why I felt fine sometimes and then not fine other times. Because when she was around, I
Yeah.
kind of felt okay. And then when she wasn't around, oh, then not so okay. And then, this would lead to all kinds of odd behaviors. Because in relationship OCD, you go, well, what's the compulsion then? You can't clean her.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Well, you
Might
could
be a
try, I
bit
suppose, right?
weird.
That'd be quite funny. So the compulsion, sometimes this subset of OCD is called pure obsession or rumination OCD. So to ruminate is to constantly think about. And the compulsions are still there. They're just not as visible. So the compulsions could be, I'm going to be overly loving and lovely because why would you cheat on me? Why would you not love me when I'm so clearly so fucking nice, right? Or I might be a bit more distant because then you'll notice that something's wrong and then you'll want to check in on me and then I'll know you can,
Like
right?
reverse psychology almost.
Yeah. And you're not necessarily think of it directly in these terms. This is just what's happening with your behavior. Or, maybe you then want to start checking a person's phone and maybe you then don't find anything. And so you feel a little bit better. But maybe then it occurs to you that maybe they knew you were going to be checking their phone. And so they deleted the messages. And so now you have to, right? And you never get to the certainty that you're after,
Yeah.
is the annoying thing at the end of this road. And the pursuit of trying to feel certain that a person won't cheat on you and won't hurt you, you can't chase the end of that rainbow. It doesn't exist. And that's upsetting if that's what you're deeply worried about, because you so desperately want to stop that thing happening. And accepting that you can't that's a battle in and of itself, even when you go through these bits. So like one last thing on this and then I'll stop
I
waffling
know
on.
it's really interesting because I think, like you said, there's a lot of crossover that we could actually delve into today.
Yeah, which is what I'm trying. I also think when we talk about mental health stuff, I think people talk about it too vaguely. They just say, I'm
Oh,
depressed, I'm anxious. And people don't relate to vague. They relate to specifics in stories. They relate to the part of crying in the toilet with
yeah.
the tap on, right? And or put it, if we're talking eating disorders, putting the tap on so people can't hear you being sick or taking mints in your bag, right? It's those bits that people relate to, not just I have an eating disorder. It's like I get it, right? And it's hard to give the specifics because the specifics are the vulnerable thing, but they're the thing that people relate to. They're the thing that make you feel less alone when you hear them in other people's stories. And so OCD itself, like back in I think it was the 70s, they were trying to figure out what is it? What's the issue? Is the issue the type of thoughts that someone has? Or is it something else? So it's a really easy study in essence to run, right? So you get bunch of people with OCD to write down all the upsetting shit that goes on in their head across the course of a week. And then you get a bunch of people without OCD to write down all the upsetting shit that goes on in their head across the course of a week. And then you just jumble the answers up. And you get your researchers to go, can you pick the crazy person from the thoughts? Can you identify them? And the short answer is no. You can't. Everyone has these types of thoughts. Everyone is worried that their partner is going to cheat on them sometimes. Everyone has bad body image days where they don't like what they see in the mirror. It's not the thought in and of itself that's the problem. It's the frequency you have those thoughts, the size of the emotional distress it causes you when you have them, and what it does to your behaviors after you've had them that cause the problems. But there's an annoying fucking reality in that pissing study, which is then that you will never get to a point where you have no negative thoughts because they occur to everyone. So if you're expecting to get to the point where I never have a worry that my girlfriend might cheat on me, I'm asking myself to be better than the human race is, to not have a thought that occurs to everyone. If you've had body image problems and every time you have any negative thought about the way you look, you have to act on it, you're screwed because no one thinks only positive things about their body all the time. And even if they did, they'd be an narcissistic arsehole. So I don't think you'd want to be him in the first place. I'm fucking perfect. There's absolutely nothing wrong with me. Like, that's not a good, you don't want to be that.
Yeah.
And so, there's the whole journey of accepting those things that is difficult. But I think for me was important to learn those things along the way of going, oh, actually, sometimes it's called theory A, theory B in OCD treatment. Theory A is, if the thing I'm worried about is likely to be true, then my compulsions make sense. So if, this desk that I'm sat in front of was covered in salmonella, then it would make sense for me to clean it and stop dismissing it and not acting upon that. If, my girlfriend was having sex with someone right in front of me right now, it would make sense for me to be like, I think she's cheating on me, right? If, however, the thing that you're worried about is not more or less likely than it would be at any other point in your life, like, I don't know right in this moment that this desk doesn't have salmonella on it. It's just probably unlikely. I don't know that right now my girlfriend isn't cheating on me. It's just, well, I haven't heard from her in the last half an hour, therefore she must be cheating. It's like, well, is it possible? Of course it's possible. But is it the only plausible explanation? Is it the most likely explanation? Well, I haven't seen anything to suggest she would be otherwise, so probably not, right? She's probably just at work or doing all the other things that people do in their days and not doing the thing that I'm terrified that on a Tuesday afternoon, she's definitely fucking that guy in a coffee shop, which would be the kind of thing I'd be thinking, right? You're like, so theory A is, if the thing you're worried about is likely to be the problem, then the compulsions make sense. They are a sensible thing to do. Theory B is that actually, if the thing you're worried about isn't really any more or less likely than it ever would be, then the problem is the compulsion itself. You can't solve a problem of uncertainty with ever more doubts and ever more checking of things, because you don't get more certain in it. You actually lose yourself in that process, and you lose pretty much all the things that you become, like someone who only thinks about that thing. It's the only thing that matters to you. You lose your entire identity and everything that you are to that one fucking annoying thing. And that bit sucks. So yeah, there you go. That's a little rundown of the OCD bit.
No, yeah, like we say, it's super important. And this is why I thought it'd be great to have you on the podcast, because actually, really digging down on mental health, but giving those actual real life examples. And you know what it's like, you listen to a podcast, you might hear one sentence, right? And then it's like, I've had podcast listeners reach out and say, almost like I've changed their life in a sense, because they've then done something to help themselves, etc., etc. And this, I feel like, listening to as well with the social media and the sort of clickbait and things like that, I wonder if there's some sort of psychology in there where, when someone feels like, right, I'm going to do X diet, and they resonate with that for some reason, suddenly they're on that diet and they're completely brought into it, and this is the best diet in the world. I wonder if there's some sort of crossover there with, what are you looking for when you're on social media, and why do you resonate with someone, and then, suddenly it's the best thing you've ever seen,
Yeah, well, the thing, I'm going to come back to the same thing. We relate to specifics. So the specificity in a story is not, do you feel unconfident? Because that's vague, right? You're like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So say when the lights are on and you're in the bedroom with your partner and you look in the mirror, or his hand strokes across your stomach, and you're paying no attention to anything other than, oh my God, I feel disgusting, and he must be feeling every roll that is on me right now, and I just want to break down and cry. Right. And at the same time, I know that it's important to have a physical relationship with this person that I care about, and yet I can't seem to get my head out of this thought. That's a specific example. And it is that people will relate to. Marketing done well is just doing stuff and saying things that people can see themselves in. And that means it's specifics. And pretty much that means it's stories, because people don't relate to numbers. They relate to stories. It's like, wow, 8,000 people died in a famine. You're like, oh, wow, that sounds terrible. But if I show you pictures and tell you about Sally over here, right? Now you're crying, right? And because we're humans and we relate to stories, we don't relate to numbers. And so I think those diet things, why is this the thing that they bought into? Why do they buy into Eddie of You right now? Right? Is he articulates things that speak to humans in a way that science often doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, you know, we do have to recognize that and realize that if we also want to be effective ourselves. And so how do we tell stories that then make Eddie Abu look like a dickhead and look like his solution is clearly not the fucking way? Because it's not, right? You know,
Yeah.
to suggest to someone that instead of ice cream, they should have an egg is
Why is it an egg?
it's comedic genius, if you ask me, because I couldn't come up with a funnier thing to suggest to someone instead of ice cream if I tried. Right. And yeah, he's deadly serious.
I think that sometimes having conversations like this, people can sort of maybe take a step back a little bit and look at what they're consuming a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it depends, you know, almost everything comes down to who are you talking to in that moment, right? Like, because the message that you put out needs to be one that the person listening to can understand. And so we have to communicate in a way that resonates with them. And well, that's going to be different if I'm talking to a bodybuilder or if I'm talking to, you know, a 43-year-old mother of two who works as a nurse, right? If I say core for cream of rice to a mother who works as a nurse who's 42 and has nothing to do with it, she has no idea what core is. If I say top set, back off set, if I call a plate a biscuit, she's going to have fucking no idea what on earth I'm talking about.
They're
I'm going
all
to
my
say
favorite sayings.
right. She's going to be in the trenches. She's going to drop the hammer. She's going to do all the things, right? It's pull the pin, right? It's she's not going to relate to any of that, but you will, because those are things that resonate with you. So I think the first bit is going like, well, who are we trying to talk to and what do they struggle with and what's the best way of resonating with them? I think sometimes just taking the piss out of things is my favorite way of making fun of those bits. Like if people want a black and white foods, these are the good foods, these are the bad foods. Like unless your list happens to contain uranium, like there's not many on the bad list that you can't have some of, right? And it be fine. Like, you know, there's a tiny amount of arsenic in apples. No one's freaking out about that, but you probably don't want big quantities. Equally, you can die from drinking too much water. Pretty much everyone knows, maybe they don't know people directly, but has heard stories of people at raves who die after taking too many pills and drinking way too much water. And
Yeah.
yet, you know, water's the healthiest substance on earth. Well, if you're trying to get someone to understand the black and white dichotomy issue, right? It's like give them the extreme examples that make them laugh where they go, oh yeah. Right? Because it's in that they'll relate to it and then be willing to go with you on the more sensible thing. Because that's the bit I think that we often miss. Like at the heart of the good and bad food, like we all recognize something in that argument that pretty much no one thinks that, I don't know, can Reese's peanut butter cups are probably better for you than apples. Like, I don't know anyone who's making that argument, right? Or saying that Diet Coke is definitely better for you than water, right? Like, I think we'd all go, yeah, if I had to hedge my bets, I'm going to say that an apple is probably healthier for you most of the time than a Reese's peanut butter cup. And water should probably be most of your fluid or whatever. So there's something in the argument, but you know, we then go too far when we go, and therefore you should never have a Diet Coke. You should never have a Reese's peanut butter cup. If you have even a sniff of it, all your family members will be sacrificed into a volcano. It's like, that's not what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
But we do simultaneously go, if this argument wasn't compelling, people wouldn't fall for it. So how do we counter it? Well, make fun of it and show them in an outrageous manner why it's clearly fucking stupid, right? And then they'll be like, yeah, that's a solid point. Because it's undeniable.
Any profile that's got Eddie Abu and they're a little face in the corner, we know that this is a real person.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you find that when you did start to talk about the struggles that you faced and the OCD on social media, did you ever have it in your mind, any worry to sort of think, would anyone go against that, or would you receive any bad comments, or did you just feel from your standpoint it was like a part of you dealing with it and maybe to reach out to other people?
When I first started doing it, I first wrote, this is how long ago it was, I wrote a blog post.
Oh,
Right.
very
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, because you remember, this is 2014 by the time I probably started speaking about it, because it was the first year was trying to understand what the hell was wrong with me, and what this stuff was. And so I didn't necessarily hide it. I just said I was struggling and not in a great place. But again, social media wasn't as big. So there weren't as many places to tell people about it. And then I started to write about it mainly because I was trying to make sense of it a little bit more for myself. And if you go through things like cognitive behavioral therapy, you'll be encouraged to keep various forms of a thought diary, and you'll have a bunch of homework effectively and tasks to do. And most of them are writing. They're increasing your awareness. They're trying to change the way you process thoughts, and situations that you find yourself in. They might be trying to get you to just sit with things and pay attention to your senses and do all kinds of mindfulness stuff. And actually, as you go through OCD treatment, it's different than treatment for standardized depression, anxiety disorders. There's a bunch of different types that you can start to go through. So actually, normal CBT ends up being worse to some degree than, well, not worse is the wrong way of saying it. It can exacerbate the problem. If you think that the problem, and this is true for eating disorder stuff too, to some degree is excess attention placed on something, right? You can't stop thinking about it, right? Well, analyzing it to the nth degree is still placing a fuckload of attention on it, right? Which is one of the reasons that mindfulness-based strategies become quite useful for this. Now, there's a type of therapy that's used for OCD that I actually went through last year because I had another big flare-up for my OCD for the first time in 10 years last year.
Oh, wow.
Um, that's called exposure and response prevention, ERP, should anyone want to go and do the thing. And ERP, you do with a therapist and you see him twice a week. My one was in Atlanta, Georgia, because I used a company called No CD. You can see what they did with the name there. Uh, and you basically you write down like a list of one that like all the upsetting things that you struggle with in your thing. So for me at the time, I just started seeing a girl I'd known for 15 years who was one of my best friends. She just gotten pregnant very, very quickly. And then it ended almost immediately because my head spiraled quite quickly as a result of some of those bits, and then she couldn't deal with it, and then it was just done and gone. And that's a particular set of circumstances I wouldn't usually like. I'd been so long without going, do I have OCD or had I had OCD? Because it had been 8 years since I'd had real big struggles with it. That's not to say there weren't moments, but remember, I think that moments are normal for every human being. So I was like, doesn't, I know how to manage it. I know how to stay on top of my thoughts. I can notice when they're turning up. It's been 8, 9 years since I looked at anyone's phone or did any of that. It's still been 10 years. I've still not done that, kind of thing. Right. So I thought I had it under control. And if I met someone new, I'd be getting to know them slowly. So I could be a bit more on guard against the fears of being cheated on, and the feelings you have gradually build. When you meet someone and you start dating them and you've had a 15-year friendship and they've been one of your best friends through that time, the feelings you have are immediately very large. And it felt a bit like a fairy tale and blah, blah, blah. And so it was, I completely lost myself for 3, 4 weeks. And then it ended. And then I took to laying in bed and crying and not doing very much else for a couple of weeks. And then I could go for I went and left the house once a day to walk 150 meters to the local church and back. I was staying at my parents' house because they just didn't want me staying by myself for that period of time. And then I gradually added a bit more in, a bit more in. And I was going through ERP at the time. And so for that was, what are the thoughts and the things that are triggering to you? So it could be just hearing Gemma's name. It could be see a picture of her. It could be thinking that she's moved on and has met someone else. It could be blah, blah, blah. And you rank how distressing you find those thoughts out of 10. 10 out of 10 being, oh my God, I'm being mentally eaten by tigers. 4 being, that's a bit easier than that. And exposure and response prevention is a game you deliberately then play with your therapist, where you pick one of the, let's say the 4s out of 10 to begin with. You deliberately expose yourself to that trigger. So you might just say the name Gemma, if that was triggering for me. So that would be one that I would start with. And then the therapist sits there with a timer, starts a 2-minute timer, and you sit there quietly, right? And you probably cry and do the rest of the stuff that you do for 2 minutes. And at the end of the 2 minutes, okay, how was that? And it was really tough. I found this and I couldn't stop. And this was going and blah, blah, blah. And like, okay, how distressed are you now? I'm now 6 out of 10. It's increased. Okay, cool. Let's do it again. Gemma, 2 minutes. Sit with it quietly. Now what? Okay, and then you describe what you kind of went through. How distressed are you? 5. Okay, so it's decreased a little bit. Okay, let's do it again. Gemma, right? And then 2 minutes, right? And then now it's a 4. And now what are you? And you're also practicing in those moments. Can you let go of the thought? Can you start to notice that it's sitting at the side of your brain screaming at you, like, pay attention to me, you little fuck, right? And when you then decrease the thing, if it started at a 6, now we've got it to a 3, I've found that I can expose myself deliberately to a trigger and I didn't have to act on it. Nothing happened. It sucked, it fucking sucked, right? But it gradually decreased in the distress that it caused me. And so you practice that for an hour, right? And then you move on to, the next trigger. So this one's a 5 and you do the same thing. So here's a picture, here's a whatever. And I think that bit is, so that's the gold standard treatment for OCD, right? Exposure and response prevention. Response prevention. Like, can you sit there mindfully and you've deliberately exposed yourself to this trigger that wants me to pay attention to it. It wants me to think about it. Can I not for just 2 minutes? Can I pay attention to my breathing? Can I pay attention to something I can see out the window? What can I hear? What can I smell? What can I touch? The senses stuff you learn. And then you check back in and where are my thoughts and feelings now? And I think you could do that with the eating disorder stuff as well, for the record. I think that would work perfectly because it's a safe space with someone where you're deliberately practicing. So what do you struggle with? I hate the way that I look in the mirror. Okay, how strong is that? Okay, so here's a picture, right? Well, that might be too much. We need to start with the lower stuff. If we start with the really hard stuff, you'll just lose and it'll be worse, right? So we have to start with this ladder of difficulty. Like, okay, so what are the ones that you're like, that you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to say that or expose myself to it. But the problem is, at some point, you are going to be exposed to it. At some point, I was going to hear the name Gemma. At some point, you're going to walk past a mirror. At some point, you're going to sit down and feel your stomach fall slightly over your jeans in a way you don't like. At some point, you're going to feel bloated. At some point, you're going to feel like you've eaten too much and maybe you want to be sick, right? If you hope that you're just never going to experience that one's not happening. So being able to know, to trust yourself that you can experience that and not act on it, that only comes from successfully navigating it. Well, having a space where you can successfully navigate that is huge. So I actually think this treatment type has a lot of legs I haven't seen anyone use it for eating disorder stuff yet, but I think they should. I'd be curious to see, because again, OCD is very similar in its psychopathology. So I think it would work very well under that same sex, again, provided it's done appropriately, professionally, etc. So I've now forgotten what your question was.
Well, no, also, like you say there, though, it's sort of what you've spoken about throughout is that acknowledgement. But then what I do find as well is that when you acknowledge something, so say it is an eating disorder or maybe disordered thoughts, right? Because it's very close.
Yeah,
when
there's
you're
no clear dividing line.
yeah, I always sort of liken it to when you're prepping for a bodybuilding show, maybe you do it multiple times, you're probably going to pick up some maybe weird and wonderful behaviors. And, often it's coupled with caring a hell of a lot about if you can do the prep, if you can stand on stage, how well you're going to do. And I feel like sometimes the acknowledgement, maybe there's a bit too much emphasis on just acknowledge it and you'll be fine. And perhaps your coach is saying, well, that's quite normal for bodybuilding. And then I guess it'd be quite cool to talk about like the actual steps of, okay, so acknowledgement, but like you say, there's some therapy there. Was there other things that your sort of therapist recommended, like speaking to maybe your parents, or was there other things that helped you get, build back up?
So this is the difficult part of OCD that is a little different, is that you want to talk about it all the time because that's the obsession.
Okay.
And if the problem is too much attention, then talking about it to lots of other people is still giving it lots of attention. So actually, for certain types of OCD, having a conversation with your loved ones to go, if you find me wanting to talk about this a lot, try and remind me, I'm not going to engage in this one because that's just us giving it more attention. I love you. I care. I don't want to just dismiss you. This probably isn't going to help though, is it? Right? Like trying to reflect that stuff back becomes useful in that. So that's actually one of the differences with it. But here's the thing. Until you know you have OCD, you have to talk to figure out what the fuck you have. Right? Like you have to go through the talking to a bunch of people about a bunch of different stuff phase to know how to treat it in the right place, because I don't know what you have. you probably don't know fully what you have. You don't, often people don't know the specifics of what they struggle with exactly because they're just struggling. They're in the midst of it. They haven't made sense of it yet. And so talking, while it might not end up being the long-term treatment, can be part of the treatment. And some of that then depends on like, well, are you just trying to go through everything alone?
Yeah.
Like cliched as it is to say, a problem shared is a problem halved and all that stuff. There's some truth to that. There's some truth to that. And it's finding you're going to need multiple ways to soothe yourself sometimes that vary. And I say vary because you could think of, again, the problem of OCD is you use the same compulsion to soothe the anxiety. Look, if we're talking eating disorders, the reason people make themselves sick or the reason people restrict their food or the reason they do excess cardio and all the things that they do is they're terrified of the weight gain bit, right? And it's the compulsion. Here's the thing that people won't get if they've never dated anyone with this or haven't looked into this, etc., is that people feel relieved when they make themselves sick. They don't feel bad. They might a bit. There might be a bit of conflicting stuff the first few times. You might even be like, is it wrong? Fuck it. Is it right that I feel relieved? I've just made myself sick. But it's only this one time. It's just this one time. And then it'll be kind of, I've got it out of my system. I want to do it again. And, then you fast forward and the person has overeaten because they keep trying to stick to something that's too restrictive for them for whatever reason. And then they've made it even harder for themselves because they've doubled down on the cardio. They've tried to eat even fewer calories. And so, and almost inevitably, they find themselves doing it again. And so then now they've learned though. Here's the thing. If you feel shit, terrible, bloated, terrified of the weight gain and things that might go alongside that, and you make yourself sick and it makes you feel better, you've just learned that that's a solution.
A coping, yeah.
Right? And it's because it is, right? It's because if you are terrified of weight gain, making yourself sick doesn't get rid of all the calories you ingested, because it doesn't. It varies on how long you make yourself sick for, what you've just eaten, how long afterwards, how long you can sustain it for, blah, blah, blah. But that's sort of the wrong argument to make with someone that, it's not as effective as you think that it might be. It's like, we're still more effective than not.
Yeah, this is the conflicting information.
Yeah, right. It's like, well, I know I ingested 3,000 calories and being sick might not remove all of them, but it removed 1,500 of them, and that's better than none, right? So I think it's the wrong argument to make to someone who's in that headspace. The argument is you're going to lose yourself to this entire condition, and your life will become a hellhole if you keep going down it. But it is itself a coping mechanism. It is a compulsion. It's a thing that makes you feel temporarily better. And the problem you can run into is you need some things that make you feel better, but every one of them can end up being a compulsion if you're not careful. And that's the really difficult balancing act. To me, if I bring it back to my own world of relationship-y stuff, what's the right amount of jealousy?
Yeah.
Because it's not zero. And there's not a clear answer. Like sometimes we want to know, how do I know when it's the right amount? You're like, oh man,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, I don't have a good answer. You kind of have to find it out over time for yourself with practice and experience of being like, what's the right amount of, I've had girlfriends say to me, I feel like you almost don't care enough. And sometimes that I think is me erring too much on the side of I won't engage with my jealous side or the thoughts about that because I know where that leads. And sometimes that might make me seem a bit too like, what's the right amount of this? I don't have a good answer. Like, what's the right amount of soothing that you need? I don't have a good answer other than trying some stuff, having honest conversations, trying to look yourself in the mirror like, am I using this too much? Do I think that where am I sitting? Is it ruining my life? Is it becoming a bit too dominant? Do I have any other? So talking to people is a soothing strategy that you probably do need to have, as is the ability to sit with it sometimes and do fucking nothing about it. As might be reading a book or watching a TV show or playing a video game or playing a musical instrument. I don't care what it is, right? But I know you need some of them. And by the way, as should food sometimes, right? But look, every person on earth has made themselves feel a bit happier by eating food at some point. It's a normal part of the human experience. And you might make the argument that people who don't have disordered eating necessarily or eating disorders, if you're working with Gem Pop or weight loss people and you ask them, what do they do for fun? What do they do that puts a smile on their face that isn't food or booze? There's basically nothing on the fucking list, right?
Sure, for sure.
You might go, that's too far the other way. So I think you need a variety. And I think it's a case by case answer for what the right amount is for someone.
Yeah, for sure. It's very individualized. This is where, there's lots of different coaches in the space. As you know, it's very inundated. And, there is a lot of horror stories. There's a lot of good stories. Some people have a coach and, that coach is individualized to them. They're training their food plan, etc. Sometimes, there can be people that get into bodybuilding and prepping, etc., etc. And maybe they have a past of an eating disorder. And I know, for a fact, I've spoken to people that have almost masked the prep as I haven't got an eating disorder now. I'm doing this thing, right? I'm doing this thing. It's all for a show. I'm an athlete. And I think sometimes it's a tricky one because maybe the coach doesn't even know before they go down this route. And there is a level of ownership needed by, of course, the client. But it's really tricky, if you do get into this sport and you're maybe not addressing what's happening before that, you're sort of facing that fear and then exaggerating it to do this thing and step on stage.
Yeah, it's a really tough one. And I think it varies based on every person's journey within it a little bit. Because on one hand, you might, not that I'm going to particularly make this argument, but you could make an argument that if someone had to have anorexia or bulimia or be into bodybuilding, which would I prefer it?
Yep.
And I might say that bodybuilding is the best of those three that we've possibly just suggested. And by the way, anorexia has the highest mortality rate of every mental health condition in the world. There is no known good treatment. I'm talking about far too many ex-girlfriends, which is telling for a relationship OCD person, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Right. But I'm a wonderful catch. But an ex of mine is a clinical psychologist who worked on an eating disorder ward at the Priory for a while. And so I have lots of stories of these bits. I've worked in the fitness industry for a long time. I've dated people with eating disorders. I've seen it for firsthand, and I've had a bunch of clients with them, right? And anorexia it really is terrifying and really horribly sad that someone can lose themselves so much to that thing and not see what the rest of us see. So if someone has moved from that to bodybuilding and found a bit more of an identity in that values not just being as small as is humanly possible, is that better? And I'd say yes. Mm-hmm. Is it perfect? No. But do I have a perfect treatment for that person? Probably not. No. So there's a bit of a case by case. I would say that's an outlier, right? That's not the most common story, but I think it's worth knowing that that can exist too. So then there's the other ones of going like, all right, someone's had a disordered eating past, or they've been bulimic or whatever. Mm-hmm. And by the way, one of the things you also see with eating disorders, people migrate between diagnoses across their life. So they might be anorexic for a bit, then they'll be bulimic for a little bit. Then they might just be binge eating disorder. There's a whole category called EDNOS, eating disorder not otherwise specified. So it seems like there's an underlying thing here that is sprouting up in different ways. And you could probably put the bodybuilding world into that other possible sprouting up area too. In which case, is this just justifying a disorder to yourself under the guise of, but I'm an athlete now, right? And you're like, yeah, that could be that. And as a coach, you are looking for red flags on those bits of what is someone's history with it? What is their expectation of these things? Is it the first time doing it? There's a difference between your first time doing it and your sixth time doing it. And I'm much more worried about the first time than the sixth time. Because if you've gone through multiple seasons as a bodybuilder, you've learned to navigate the prep itself isn't even the shit bit. It's the post-prep bit that's the shit bit, right? So if you're into multiple seasons, I know you've navigated that and you've probably learned some lessons along the way. I'm less likely to be worried about you doing it for the third season in a row than the first time, where we can have all the conversations under the sun ahead of time about what it's going to be like. And it still means you still won't fully understand that. You still have to walk that path yourself. So coaches, we have I would say, a duty of care to look out for this stuff and to actually be reasonably informed about this topic. At the same time, I can't make my client do anything. I can't make them diet. I can't make them stick to anything. I can't stop them being sick. I can't stop them doing excess cardio. And there are going to be clients who you should say, I don't think this is right for you. And I'm a bit wary of this stuff. And they might then leave and go to someone who isn't going to say that. And so they'll go. So then you've got this difficult bit of going like, well, if this person is determined to do so, do I trust them to have a better experience with me or just any fucking Joe Blogs who knows nothing about this stuff? And I don't have a good answer for that. Like, I think that's a conundrum I sometimes struggle with. I mean, I don't really live in the bodybuilding space anymore. I do a lot of photo shoot prep for people, which tends to involve a bit less of that for guys. But it is a conundrum. Like I've had that conversation with people for things. It's like, and honestly, if I'm thinking that, I would just voice all the things I'm thinking, just like I did there, to them, and be like, "Here's what I'm thinking. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. And that going out and that." Like, where are you at? Having heard me say all that stuff.
And this is where it's relatable for your own example. You know, when you said you moved in with your parents and you were in that spot, although it's a different scenario, of course, that post show you just said about, you know, suddenly you're alone and that thing is done, right? The show is done, and all the cheerleaders, you know, they're carrying on with their normal life, and suddenly you're in bed, and whatever the placing is, etc., etc., there's a lot of things to consider, but you're in bed crying, you don't know what to do. Suddenly you have to eat food and put on body weight, and you've been doing a prep for 6 months or more, and it's suddenly that like, holy shit. So I think even that crossover there as well for, you know, where you got to that point yourself, and then being able to build your life back up. Of course, we touched on there about, you know, parents, speaking with them when it's appropriate, and them knowing what's going on. I think sometimes maybe people letting their family members know what post show involves, and sort of talking about that. Was there any other things on top of sort of when you started doing your walks? What other things were you doing during that time? Or was it really just self-care and?
Yeah, self-care. So, you know, if I look back on that, I don't think I could have got better any faster. And it was helped by the fact I'd been through this before. I kind of knew what to expect to some degree. ERP was new compared to the treatment that I went through the first time, which was different. But the expectation of going, look, if I'm not psychologically well enough to be able to concentrate on anything or do seemingly anything, then none of the rest of my life matters all that much. So this is priority number one. And then we can build out from there. And I couldn't make myself do anymore. Like I wasn't there. I was just crying 20 hours of the day. And I had no energy to give. When I like to go for a walk to the church and back, I was just genuinely drained from that for hours afterwards. And I would just lay on the sofa in a duvet with YouTube on in the background, half paying attention to it most of the time. And then after another sort of week of doing that, I think I'd got to a month, maybe 5 weeks of being at my parents'. And I'd had a couple of friends then start to come around and see me. And I had a little bit more energy. I was feeling a bit better. I was like, right, I'm gonna go home and be at my own place and see how I go. So I moved back to here and then took to doing still much of the same. I was like, right, I'll go out for a walk each day. It'll be a bit further this time, right? I'll have to go and, get some of my own food in. And I'll still lay on the sofa. I will now be, after 2 weeks of doing very little, I was replying to my clients, right? I was just doing client check-in stuff, but I wasn't doing anything else for social media or any of my other crap that I need to do. And I was like, I sort of don't care, right? Like that stuff will come back. Why? Yeah. That's fine. Let's deal with the people who are currently paying me. And that's enough to ask of myself right now. And then another week or so of that. And I think I then went and did like my first gym session back, which was just go and I'm here. Let's do whatever I fancy doing for, 2 sets of things and try not to cry in public and see how that goes. Right. And so that's what I went and did with that bit. And okay, now it's a little bit better. And now I'm sat in front of the computer a bit more and I can do a little bit of work. And then I'm still laying on the sofa quite a lot. And then I started noticing I could make myself do things a bit more. So, all right, let's go and make myself do that. But it was a forced effort to make myself do stuff. And then I noticed that sometimes I didn't make myself do things when I felt like I should have maybe made myself do things. And that actually I was then worse for not having forced myself to do stuff. And so, after a couple of days of like, oh, I feel mentally worse because I actually haven't left the house because I've justified to myself that my self-care was really important and that I just didn't really feel up to it. And actually, 3 days of doing that, I'm like, oh, I'm worse than I was when I was forcing myself to do stuff, even though I didn't feel like doing it. Okay, maybe I need to force myself to kind of do this and accept that I'm not going to feel like doing it yet, but that clearly I was improving, I was getting better. So let's start that process. And so then we're at 2 months afterwards type thing, and gradually my life is back to, I won't say normal, but kind of getting there, right? And okay, I'm going to the gym regularly now. I'm back making some content. I'm turning up to stuff. It's still a challenge every day. I'm still thinking about her every day and all the things hundreds of times. Yeah, maybe it's a bit less than that at that point, but like at least 50 odd times a day, I'm going, let's think about Gemma and then let's not, right? And deliberately noticing, oh, I want to think about that again and I want to ruminate on it and I want to dwell on it and I want going, no, how do I refocus on the present and whatever it is that I'm trying to do? And sometimes that's frustrating. And so sometimes you'd cry about the fact that it's just so fucking hard,
And you're
right? Yeah. And just desperate to be like, why does this have to be this hard? And, I accepted at the time it was probably going to take me the best part of a year to feel normal. And that's turned out to be kind of the case. Like it got easier week by week, month by month, and year by year. I still have occasional thoughts about it, but so I can deal with them. It's ERP. Oh, look, there's a trigger. Like, response prevention. I don't have to do anything with this. And the more successfully I don't engage with it, the easier it is to then continue to not deal with it. Because I've proven to myself, oh, okay, so the psychological distress that used to be an 8 is now a 3. I laugh at a 3. A 3 can fuck off, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right. A 3 is a piece of piss, right?
I got this.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. And having been through it before, I was accepting that that was likely what the process was going to be because sadly, these aren't things that you can click your fingers and, oh, and now I'm better. No, sadly, if you're having hundreds of these thoughts a day, then getting better looks like having 190 a day, then 180, then 170, and then 160. And, you're better then still means you're having 80 upsetting thoughts a day. That doesn't feel that much better, but it is. And so, and you're desperate for it being better to mean no thoughts a day, right? And so you'll beat yourself up sometimes of like, God, I'm still fucking thinking about this. I'm supposed to be better than this. Why can't I be better? That, by the way, is still engaging with the thought. It's not letting it go and not paying it attention. It's just a different way of engaging with it. So even that beating yourself up, you have to catch yourself and go, oh no, I'm engaging with it again, aren't I? All right, okay. What am I doing? Refocus on what I'm doing. So the process in essence is quite simple,
Yeah.
but simple does not mean easy. They are two different words that people use interchangeably incorrectly.
Yeah,
A lot
I
of what
love
we
how you
do.
said being present. I think that's a big message I often deliver to clients. It's like, if something's happening, a trauma at the time or a multitude of things, if the diet's getting harder, things like this, it's like, can we be present in this moment? And maybe, if something's very acute, right, that is hard. But when you like this, what you talk about, sort of the journey away from that first year, it's like, can I just take a moment to maybe look at what I'm grateful for in this moment? And that even transfers to, I'm thinking about it 80 times instead of 280 times, and also a level of going, do you know what, I'm doing quite well here. And it's not saying you have to be like, oh yeah, I'm so good and all of this. It's like, give yourself a little bit of encouragement to say how far you've come, whatever those mental challenges are. And, if there is points during that time, and I'm sure there was for you, where it's like, actually, I'm getting close to maybe like the anxieties or feeling like you're crying, that not stopping you is, of course, a big step forward as well. Did you have times during that year that it was like, I've got to run to the toilet or whatever, when you were trying to do these things?
So did I cry in a toilet across the course of a year? God, yes. Uh, I don't say that I would run from it. Like, I am very okay with being open and honest about it. And because it's true, it's the reality. And this thing has robbed enough of my life. And to give it more things for me to feel ashamed of and to hide, even though they're true, is to give it more power over me than I want to give it. And so, even if it's a fucking stubbornness inside of yourself that's a little middle finger to this thing that has dominated and ruined your life to
Mm.
some degree,
Yeah.
that's, I think, important and powerful enough. And being like, look, the first time you say this stuff to people is emotional,
Yeah.
and you will cry your fucking eyes out
Yeah.
and you will babble and be incoherent and be terrified of saying it. And what you will find is that people are kind
Mm.
and they care and they want to be there for you. And those fears that you had about what someone might say when you confess your sins turn out to be not really very real. They're kind of these imagined worries of what people might say, and that's not what they'll say. They might not know what to say, but they won't say, well, you're pathetic and you suck, right? Because that's not what they're going to say. And so then you'll find that the second time you say it, it's easier than the first. And then you'll find the third time you say it's easier than the second. And you'll fast forward a year, and it doesn't take that much bravery to be honest about it, because I've spoke about it fucking loads of times. It still makes you emotional sometimes. I got a little emotional there talking about it. But most of the time, it doesn't make me emotional at all
Yeah.
to talk about my OCD, because I've spoke about it loads, and
Mm.
I've accepted it, and I've come to terms with it, and I've moved on with my life, and it's not a big feature in it most of the time.
Mm.
I have to be slightly on guard against it, as last year taught me that under the right circumstances, rather like riding a rather shitty bike, it can come back very quickly, even if you haven't ridden that bike for 10 years. Like, your brain knows how to ride that bike. So it's important to not let yourself get too complacent. Certainly with I would say that with the eating disorder stuff too. That this shit, if you're not careful, within a few weeks, you're like, oh, fuck, how am I back here?
Doing
Right?
that again.
Yeah, doing it again. Right?
Yeah.
Right. But, when you talk about it, it is scary the first time, and it requires courage and bravery to talk about it the first time. But man, I think it's a thing to aim at, to get to the point where it requires no bravery and courage to talk about it, because it holds that little sway over you. That's generally where I am these days, and I'm telling you, that's a much nicer place to be with it.
I think as well, you spoke about anorexia being something mental health wise, that, it's one of the biggest killers. Now, there's also those stats that I've seen many times with male suicide being between the certain ages. And, a lot of the time, people aren't coming forward because they are scared, what you're talking about there. And it's upsetting because, the external pressures, what we're led to believe, etc., etc. And I feel like there's more now, but I feel like as a man as well, it's, I should be okay. I should be doing this. I should be going to the gym and running the home and all of these things. And for yourself, I'm sure you have clients and followers that go, fucking hell, do you know what? He's speaking about something that I have, maybe not the OCD, maybe some anxieties or something like this. And it's like, you're probably giving a lot of people faith and hope that maybe you don't know about, right?
Well, thanks.
But
Yeah, look, I'm going to go back to that word specificity again. People relate to the specifics in stories. And when you first start talking about your mental health struggles, you will talk vaguely about it because you're scared and embarrassed. And so it's as much as you can muster to say, I'm depressed, or I'm struggling, or I've got my mental health isn't good. Like, that feels like a big thing to say. And it might be. And if that's all you can muster and manage, then good for you. That's the right thing to say. The problem is that it's vague, and we don't relate to vague. We can't see ourselves in it. We don't know what it means. I don't know if I share something with you when you say, oh, I'm depressed, because most of us will go, okay, Like
Sometimes.
I've been depressed sometimes. Yeah. Like what what does that look like? The more I've spoken specifically and given examples of what that looks like, the more people have, and God, it's emotional when people share their shit with you,
Yes, it is.
because it's a privilege, really, because I will have people tell me things they don't tell their friends and their family. And you don't know the difference that might make to someone's life. And I'm not, I sit here and be like, oh yeah, therefore I've saved lives. No, who God only knows. But you don't know how important some conversations can be for people in their lives. And you owning it and you talking about it to other people allows them to feel sometimes a bit less alone with it, a bit less like they're the only person going through it. And you have to see that you're not the only person going through it, because you won't be.
Mm.
You might be pretty shit and you might be quite rare. But in the billions of people on this earth, you're probably not that special, right? There's probably be something very, very similar to it. And there's hope in that, because other people have found their ways out of the shithole that you find yourself in. And if other people have found a way out of it, then it has to be possible for you. I don't know that you will, because I can't promise you that, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do believe that it's possible. If someone else has managed to be in a better place from something that looks a lot like where you are now, then it is at least possible to get better. And you need that hope.
It's so
You know,
important. Even that glimmer. And my podcast's been going for sort of 2.5 years now. And the ones where I do solo episodes, I've spoken about trauma I've been through and some really very vulnerable subjects. And they're the ones that people reach out off the back of. And they say, like you say there, we're not crediting that we're saving lives, as it were, but it doesn't even need to be the same scenario. So like we say, it doesn't need to be relationship OCD. It could be something else. And you describing it the way you have today, it's like, well, actually, there could be some hope. And I feel like as well, it's a good example of you being a coach yourself, me being a podcast host and a coach, to actually go, do you know what, our clients potentially respect us a little bit more here. And actually, it is okay to sometimes struggle yourself.
God, yeah. Well, first off, you do. So if you're pretending you're not, you're a fucking liar, right?
You're not superhuman. It's not
Yeah,
possible.
you know what I mean? It's like, fuck off. Don't pretend you haven't been through a struggle, right? You're fucking out. I think as a coach, you can't coach what you don't know. And so your clients will do all kinds of dumb things, right?
We've been there as well.
Because we've fucking been there, right? Like, and and they're likely, especially if we're talking the bodybuilding space, right? So we'll often be talking about binges and stuff like that. I know for a fact, fucking every bodybuilder I know has binged their tits off multiple times, right? And so when your clients do it, they'll feel a bit embarrassed and ashamed. They might think that it's not normal. They might not want to tell you. They might want to hide the rubbish from the binge they had underneath other things in the bin so their other family members don't know that they had a binge. They might want to do it quietly in the car before they go in the house, blah, 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 right? Giving specifics, because that's what we relate to.
Sure.
And the reality is that you've done it, probably. You probably know what those things feel like. And if you want your client to tell you the truth about what they're doing, then they have to feel comfortable with you. And I think the easiest way for someone to feel comfortable with you is for you to confess your sins first. It's for you to be honest about the shit you've been through, even as you say, if it's not directly related. It doesn't matter. They've seen that you're okay with being vulnerable about things you're a bit embarrassed about sometimes, and things that you, on one level, I'd love to sit here and say I didn't have OCD. Like my life would have been fucking way better without that particular thing, but it's not true. So, I'm just being honest. I think that's part of having integrity, is being actually who you are in a bunch of different situations and not pretending, so many coaches think they have to put themselves on some kind of pedestal in front of their clients and be superhuman and be this perfect role model. It's like, look, a role model with no flaws is not a human being. Now, look, if all you are is your flaws, then we might have a problem too, right? Like you know, you are trying to lead a bit by example and to direct the way. And so hopefully most coaches should have successfully navigated a lot of their problems in order to guide the ship. Like sometimes if you're fully in the midst of the struggle, it might be a difficult place to guide other people from because you haven't seen a way out yet. But you know, there's a balance to this bit, and honestly saying, oh, I've struggled with this, and this is what, like, if I want clients and I think they've probably been eating a bit much and they're a bit ashamed, and they don't want to tell me, I just tell them about the biggest binges I've had. And I say, I had this, and then this, and then this happened, and then I still went and had that, and my fucking stomach was distended, and I could barely keep eating, and yet I kept going. In fact, if you listen to this, here's my biggest binge, right? So at the time, it was, I was in a 6-month-long prep, and my girlfriend at the time wanted to go for a duck burger, right? On London South Bank, there was a, right, it's specific this, right? There was there's a food market on London South Bank, just behind the Queen Elizabeth Hall. It's a pretty good food market. It was there on a Saturday. She was like, I really want to have this, like, it's a duck burger and a brioche bun. And I was like, all right, I've still got 2 months out. I've not had a binge this entire prep. I'm well on course. All right, I'll budget 1,000 calories for this duck burger and the triple fat fried chips that came with it. Oh, so good. They had a garlic mayo.
I love chips.
So good, right? And so I was like, all right, I can make that work. Let's go and do this. She's put up with me being hungry and moody. Let's go. Right. So off I went, had this thing. Best thing I'd eaten in such a long time. It was fantastic. Right. So happy days. But this was like about 1 p.m. We went in the morning. And then kind of wandering around London a little bit. And there was a frozen yogurt place near Leicester Square called Snog. And I was like, they do a it's a ridiculous name, right? It's a ridiculous name. They did a salted caramel frozen yogurt that was like 350 calories. And I was like, not much more. All right, let's have that. And I'll put some strawberries and stuff instead of the chocolate on it. Fine, happy days. So I get that. Say again.
Micronutrients.
Yeah, 100%. I was being healthy, you know. All right, so I had this. So all right, fine. But then the frozen yogurt place was right next to an old school sweet shop, right? And I fucking love pick and mix, right? It's like, oh, I'm such a nibbler, right? So I was like, all right, maybe we'll get some pick and mix, right? So I go into the shop and I got a fucking giant bag of everything. You know, when you're like, I started by trying to be like, I'll just have a few bits. These few bits just kept adding. Right? I'm sure I had about nearly a kilo's worth of fucking sweets in this bag, right? I also then had, they did white chocolate Reese's peanut butter cups, and I'd not seen these at the time. So I was like, oh my, I'm gonna need me some of those, right? So then I'm having this. And then I'm just plowing through this pick and mix party wheelie. And at this point, I'm like, I've kind of fucked this a little bit, haven't I? I'm like, yeah, pretty much. You're like, well, I've already fucked it. So we may as well go all in on this, right? The diet's back on tomorrow. So after we then headed back to where I was living, which is about a half an hour train away from kind of where we were, got in. It had just gone Easter. Now I had a couple of Easter eggs, but I'd hidden them away so that I wouldn't have them. But I knew now this Easter egg was going down, right? So the Easter egg comes out, big Easter egg, a couple of Maltesers bars or whatever's going on kind of with it. So Maltesers bars are way better than Maltesers. I'll just say that for the record. The Malteser bunny, sensation. All right.
I feel like you're my spirit animal.
Yeah, there you go. I was this day, right? I also then ordered a KFC Mighty Bucket for one. That's another 1,400 calories kind of right there. I had a whole tub of Ben and Jerry's, like big, the full fat fucker fish food. No, actually, it was half baked. It was half fish food, half cookie dough, because that's the fucking fantastic one. I had a big bag of popcorn. I think I had some other stuff in here as well. Either way, right? Like there was a lot of food going out. My stomach was fully distended. I still wasn't full. Right. I could have kept going. The only reason I sort of stopped was my stomach was in physical pain, even though I didn't really feel full. And there wasn't really anything left in the house. You know, like that's the biggest binge that I ever had. And well, you know, I then learned from that of going 2 weeks after it, I had one of my clients at the time, it was her 30th birthday, and she'd hired out a venue just off Oxford Street. And I wanted to be there for my client's birthday because it's the right thing to do. She's been paying me for a good couple of years. And, you're friends with your client at that point.
Yeah.
But I also knew if I go to this thing, I should not trust myself around too much temptation exposure, because did you not just hear my story?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, if I get the train in and walk, that's fine, but that's adding another hour each side for the journey. So that's 2 hours. So if I eat before I leave, well, there's an hour before I get there. Then there's the hours I'm spending at the place, and then the hour it's going to take me to get home. And if I go to the train station at 11 p.m., that train station has a McDonald's in it, and that McDonald's smells real good. And those trains are only every half an hour. So if I have to wait 20 minutes and there's McDonald's in the air, I'm probably going to eat the McDonald's, aren't I? So maybe let's not do that. So my solution instead was then, I want to go, I should be there. I'm going to drive in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to eat before I leave. I'm going to take a protein shake and an apple with me. I've said to my girlfriend, we're only going for 3 hours after we get there. Because then yeah, basically. Well, it wasn't just that one, because I'd taken some food that I could make that work. It was more that I discovered over time that, like, if I go out and I'm not drinking, so I'm on the Diet Cokes, being around people who are drinking is fine for about 3 to 4 hours, and then they're too drunk relative to how sober you are.
It's
right?
a bit.
Yeah, the personal space is pissed off, but you're really sober. So the fact that they're talking right next to your cheek is like, this is less. No, go away. So I was like, all right, we'll go for 3 hours. I know there's canapes and stuff there, but I'll have just eaten, so that's okay. I don't mind saying no to that. I don't miss drinking particularly, so that's all fine. And I've got the food. So we'll go from 7, leave at 10. I'll have the food. We'll drive back, happy days. And so that is what I tried to do. It went perfectly. I learned the lesson. I didn't just tell myself that, oh, I won't binge again.
Yeah.
Because I fucking would have, right? Did I not? Well, who do I think future me is way better than present me? No, he's not. He's just as dumb as present me was, right? So it's like, I think if you're trying to have people and you're coaching them confess to the dumb stuff they've done, confess to the dumb stuff you've done, because there's fucking loads on that list. And then it still doesn't guarantee that they'll be honest with you, because you can't make someone want to tell you the truth about things they're ashamed of. But I'll tell you this, it makes it way more likely. Just like most people do end up telling you the dumb shit they're doing once you start saying it.
Yeah, it's like I have fucked up. I talk about on the podcast my first couple of seasons. My coach said sort of have what you want, as it were. So I did just that. And like you say, you're not full up, but I reference it as like a food baby. It's like there's an alien and everything's going, and it's very uncomfortable. It's just you're like, whoa, what has happened? Then of course you're worried about the weight gain, etc., etc. But I feel like, almost like we've said the whole time, these stories are relatable, and we can say it with a bit of jest as well, because we have been there. And I feel that that's important sometimes, because you can get into that state of mind that you're demonizing what you've done. You're a bad person. That you are the binge, right? You've done something wrong.
You are nothing but a human binge. That's apparently you've lost all other personality.
It does become so consuming, doesn't it? Because you think, oh, I've fucked everything. The whole world has ended. If it means a lot to you, the sort of diet or the prep. And I think actually sometimes people talking about it that have been doing this stuff for years, it's like, actually, maybe you have done it once, or maybe you hear someone talk about it and it's a lesser degree if you do come across it, or having some strategies. But I feel the strategy is honesty with your coach. So what you said is so important.
Yeah, God, yeah. Like you can't coach what you don't know. So if someone isn't telling the truth about that stuff, well, as a coach, you have a role in how likely your client is to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Right. Like, look, if someone wants to go on stage or do a photo shoot, then you do have to tell them the truth. And sometimes that means, there is a time frame on this that we need to lose stuff by, and blah, blah, blah. And so, to some degree, people are paying you to be direct with them. And I would say direct rather than blunt, because I think sometimes people take blunt to be like, just be a cock.
Here's a plan. Fuck off.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's not that, right? So, we have to do that, but you can still have compassion within that, right? Like, you don't win extra prizes by being harsher than you need to be. And if you have a go at someone because they fucked up once, then you're probably the world's biggest hypocrite, because I ain't buying that you haven't fucked up a whole bunch of stuff in your life. And so, be a better human. If you want those people to tell you the truth, are you modeling the kinds of behavior to your client that would encourage them to tell the truth? right? It's like, it's all well and good you having a great physique and having client results, and you need those too. But you should also, in the way that you coach people, be coaching people so that they think you give a shit about them, right? And that you care about them, because they're people at the end of it. They're not just a cash cow. And if you think they are, go fuck yourself, right? Like they're human beings at the end of this. And the most rewarding part of being a coach isn't just your client getting a result. It's this person you care about who's been on a journey getting a result, right? It's the human part. We're back to stories. We're always back to stories. And like, you just don't hear people talk about that. People almost talk in the bodybuilding world about their clients like they're fucking cattle, right? It's like, they're not, they're people.
Yeah.
Treat them as it.
Well, it is as well. It's back to what you touched on earlier about the sort of red flags in regards to if someone is going to go into a prep. You know, when I talk to someone about if they've approached me and they're talking about a prep, it's like, I'm going to spend time outlining the whole process, the potentials, the risk versus reward, the pros, the cons. And I have had clients that have turned into lifestyle clients. It's not the right time for them to do a bodybuilding prep. But of course, as you've outlined there, a paycheck to go, well, it's X amount a month. You want to do a prep, crack on. We can't stop that. We can't change that. However, we can be here giving that message to help people understand a little bit more. And also, I have coaches listen to the podcast, and I think that that's important as well. And do you mentor coaches as well?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more you can call these things out a little bit is one thing we can do, right? And I'm always in two minds of exactly how you should go about doing that. You could call it out directly if you wanted, right? You could call out the behavior rather than a person. Like, I don't have strong feelings as to what the right move is for someone. People have different approaches to those things, and fine. But I think the more important part to some degree is that long term stories come out, and your reputation as a person and as a coach comes out. And we will both know lots of horror stories of shit show coaches that would probably blow most people's minds. So, you could write books that would be quite funny on how bad some coaching can be. And it's tragic comedy that is only funny because you almost laugh at being like, what?
That bad.
Yeah. What do you mean you hospitalized the bikini girl?
I know.
Why were they on that much gear? Right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So you come across these bits that you go, fucking hell. I hope that longer term, as people talk, that stories of those people catch up with them, and that people who are better, stories of them go around, and people have, that's what a reputation is. And the downside sometimes, I think, is that the often good caring coaches aren't the greatest at marketing themselves, right? Aren't the greatest at making engaging content. And so, there's less stories to tell about them because people don't know about them as well. So it's, if you can find those people and then nurture them and show them how to make content that's more engaging so that more people know they exist, then we're winning, right? Then we're winning, because often the shit coaches are pretty good marketers, right? And they make engaging content. They just happen to be fucking crap at their job, which means their client retention sucks, right? Turnover and churn. I combine two words. Turnover is way higher than it should be. Whereas often great coaches have great client retention, but they don't have that many clients because they need you can meld these worlds. But sometimes I cling to the hope that the shit ones out themselves eventually. So we can call these things out. I think doing what you're doing here and speaking honestly and openly about these bits is huge. And then you try, and whether it's for me in a mentoring kind of sense or whatever, you try and show younger coaches a path that looks a little different on that. That is, look, we want you to be great at your job. I want you to be able to get people amazing results. I also want you to be a caring person who doesn't put the result ahead of the person. The person is ahead of the result. And if those two things come into conflict, I care more about the person than the result, right? There might be another time. There might be a better place. Right? That's fine. Because I mean, look, when you go and do this job for a long period of time, you're going to have clients who I've had everything from clients who've lost children to clients who've lost, and this is more in-person PT more than online, people who've had, I had a lady who had spinal cancer, and she wasn't going to get to see her 5-year-old boy grow up. And so she broke down in a session and cried because of, and I was 26, I think, at the time. And like, what do you do with that? You go into the office and you give the person a hug and you sit there and you listen and you go, oh, my fucking God. Right. Or you'll have people go through divorces and hardships and eating disorders and OCD and everything in between. And one of the beautiful things of this job is the personal connection. I think it's a genuine privilege to do that. I've been to weddings, I've held kids, I've held grandkids of clients, right? And those are the bits that stay with you as much as anything, is the people that you knew and the stories that you have. And like, I would like to try and let coaches know that having this as a great career is, yeah, it's about making good money and getting client results and all that stuff, but it's also about the people in it. It's
Yeah.
absolutely about the people, and a successful career involves all of that. And we just don't hear that very often, I don't think. It's just cash.
Yeah,
It's
and
cash and abs, right?
well, in the physique realm, right? Like sometimes I'll share stories of a client that's maybe like done a hike or something. So it's not my bodybuilding audience, as it were, but I work with a lot of lifestyle clients, and I'm so fucking happy for them. I'm sharing this story to celebrate them. They can see I'm proud, they're proud of themselves. And or they might have done, something quite small to them, as it were, but actually it's like that's actually quite big. And then they're like, oh, it is. And I'm on
Yeah.
the story. And it's really, really nice because you are changing lives. And I agree with you so much about what this job can bring. And I hope people listen as well. It reminds them that this is such a cool job. And yes, like you say, we need to earn money, right? Money makes the world go round, etc., etc. But yeah, I'm like, Paul, you are my person.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. Now, before we wrap up, I have a question for you, and
Go for it.
it will sort of summarize today. If you could give yourself one bit of advice from what you've learned through your whole time in the fitness space, and you could go back to right at the start before you got into this realm, what would it be?
It would be about people, because it would be about getting mentors sooner. Like my own career. Well, so I've been a PT. This is my 15th year, and uh, I could be where I am in the industry now, probably in half the time with the right guidance and stuff. Now, some of that was lost to OCD, right? I lost a good year and a bit to not working that much and just ticking over because that was all a shit show and a struggle. When I first qualified, I went to drama school. I was an actor for many years, and when I first started PTing, it was alongside still acting. So the first 3-4 years was still doing that. So some of the reason it was a bit slower is that I was juggling other stuff and what have you. But that said, I think to have this job as a career, most PTs get into this because it's a hobby. They like training themselves. So how do you turn a hobby into a career? Because it's a slightly different thing, right? And I think you need to feel like you're progressing at least something most of the time. And by that, I mean, are you earning a little more money? Are you getting more client results? Do you feel like your skill set is improving? Are you more confident in what you do? Do you feel like you're earning more but working a little bit less? Have you got a bit more freedom going on in your life? Like all of those bits can be things that you could be improving. And I think if you spend, I don't know, 3 to 6 months and none of those things move forward in any way, you will start to feel like you're losing your enthusiasm, like you're losing your passion for what you do, because you're just ticking over day to day. Everything's the same. Like, I think to have a career, you need to feel like something is improving. And for me, when I really started investing in, so your partner knows me for biomechanics stuff primarily, right? When I started investing in that, I was like, oh, wow, this world's really, really cool. And I can learn these things. And so, this all makes way more sense to me. And training is so, and I found this passion and this excitement for going on. And as the more I spent on that, the more I ended up earning, because I was getting better at what I did and getting better results and enjoying it more at the same time. And then when I started investing in business stuff, that paid off within that bit. And so if you pick the right mentors, I think it accelerates what you do, how you do it, paths to go down, direction of where to go. It helps you meet peers. Like this industry, if you're in person or you're online, it can be quite a lonely career, right? To some degree. Like if you're online, you have an office job. Congrats, right? You're a half a content creator, half an online coach, but all of that is basically in front of a desk. And so I could go a whole week and not see anyone if I wanted to, which would suck. Even if you're in person, and I did in person for 13 years of these 15, like you see people all the time, but you're having the same conversations. What'd you get up to on the weekend? Tell me about Game of Thrones. Blah, blah, blah. You're bored of your own stories about. I can't tell anyone anymore about what I got up to on Saturday night because it's the 17th time I've said this week and I don't fucking care anymore. Right. So, that can be a little bit lonely and repetitive. Now, the hours can be a bit unsociable within that. But as we've said, it can also be this wonderful career. And for me, it was when I found people to help guide me, I found more of my passion again. I started earning more. I started enjoying it a bit more. I found another group of people that mentors and then peers, people I could speak to who I weren't just looking up to, but were in similar boats to me. So because if you work in a gym, or even if you're an online coach, it's not common for you to have that many friends who you also look up to and respect. So the PTs in most of the gyms that I worked at, lovely people. So it's not a criticism of them of people whatsoever. But, I didn't aspire to be like them. They didn't feel like they cared as much about having a career or wanting to be better and all the rest of that stuff. And so you don't really have a group of peers and people that you can see a future in, that you're excited by, that you're pushed by, that you can confide in, that you can share some of your struggles of like, this fucking client's left and I'm worried about this and right? Like all of those bits are useful. So if I could go back, I wouldn't change too much. I also will say that I learned to some degree more about coaching human beings from therapy than I learned from anything that I ever did on those bits. So that's a big bit too. So on one level, I wouldn't change the OCD because I think it's actually taught me a lot. Occasionally I wish it would fuck off, but like for the most part these days, I'm quite glad for the lesson. But it's all people. It's all people.
Yeah, people help people, people buy people, people invest in people, and that doesn't have to be through the money side. That can be, like we've already spoken about, that glimmer of hope, or I certainly feel like in a place of influence. And again, it's not me saying that everyone's watching you and I and what have you, but even if one person is watching us or listening today and they think, that has really given me that glimmer of hope, or anything that they've taken from it, it is a gift. And I know you're going to resonate with that. Now, so do you do online coaching, you do mentorship? If people wanted to reach out, if someone's listened and they're looking at having a coach or a mentor, is it Instagram, Paul? Do they go
Yes.
to Instagram?
Instagram is the easiest place to find. But yeah, if you just search Paul_Standell, Standell, you will find me on there. So yeah, I do coaching and mentoring within that. Primarily for 95% of my clientele are PTs themselves or online coaches. You get the occasional person who's just really into fitness who likes doing that kind of stuff, but most of them these days are. In fact, whenever I get people apply who aren't coaches, they're almost apologetic. Like, do you work with normal people? I'm like, yeah, you're fine, dude. Right? kind of thing within there. So it always makes me laugh a little bit on that part. But yeah, those are the two main things. You can also check out. So I run a company called the Personal Trainer Project, or the PT Project, where we do a bunch of education within there as well. So we have a biomechanics course that is cleverly called the biomechanics course. And we have, yeah, it's crazy that, right? And we have a level 1 coaching certificate, which is effectively an introduction for all of the things that I thought people would benefit from knowing when they were getting into this. So there's some mechanics in there, an anatomy within there. There's lead generation in person, and how to actually work with people in person, and our tips and tricks from over the years. There's the same thing for online content creation and lead generation on that stuff. And there's a whole module on what I just call client-centric coaching, which is, most PTs want to have conversations about how much protein should I give a person, which is fine, right? We can have a conversation about whether it should be 1.6 or 1.8 or whatever, right? But the reality is when you're working with most humans, it's about practically how can you come up with things they will stick to, and how can you get them to tell you the truth about shit they're embarrassed about when they overate on cheesecake, right? So it's lessons for how you go about doing all of that stuff and how you create those relationships. So we've got that. We've just finished, actually, and it's coming out soon. We've got a course for Pure Gym that we've just done for them called Gym Floor Mastery that comes out internally for them in the next couple of months. We have an exercise library product coming soon. There's quite a few things coming down the pipeline as well. So you can check out any of those should you so wish. Or if you just want to bug me with questions about whatever, again, Instagram me, just DM on there and I will, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Paul. And I will
My
finish
pleasure.
with this sentiment. What Paul's described today, it does show you that you can rebuild your life, guys. And we are, everyone is facing tricky times throughout their life and tough times. But I know that so many people reach out because this type of podcast is so, so helpful. So I appreciate your honesty and I respect you a lot. So thank you, Paul.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye.